Rewire your mind. Because the reality you are experiencing right now is not as fixed as you think it is. Most people believe that life is something that happens to them, that opportunities are random, that success belongs to the lucky, that love appears by chance, that wealth is reserved for the fortunate few. But what if none of that were true? What if your reality was not random, but programmed? Your brain is not a passive observer of the world. It is not sitting quietly in your head, watching life unfold. It is constantly working behind the scenes, predicting what is going to happen next, filtering information, deciding what matters, ignoring what is not, highlighting what aligns with what you already believe. Every second, your brain is receiving millions of bits of sensory information from your environment. The sounds around you, the colors you see, the conversations you hear, the opportunities that exist within reach. But you consciously notice only a tiny fraction of it. Why? Because your brain is acting as a prediction machine. It scans your past experiences, your beliefs, your fears, your expectations, and then uses them to predict what your future should look like. It builds a model of the world based on what you think is possible for you. And once that model is built, your brain begins filtering reality through it. If you believe you are not attractive, your brain will filter out signs of interest from others. If you believe you are not capable of success, your brain will filter out opportunities. If you believe money is hard to earn, your brain will notice every struggle and ignore every possibility. You are not seeing the world as it is. You are seeing the world as you are. This is where science meets manifestation. The law of attraction has often been described as a mystical force, a universal energy that responds to your thoughts and feelings. And while that language may sound spiritual, modern psychology and neuroscience are beginning to reveal something deeply interesting. Your internal state changes your perception. Your perception changes your behavior. Your behavior changes your results. And your results reinforce your beliefs. This loop repeats over and over again. Thought becomes emotion. Emotion becomes action. Action becomes outcome. Outcome becomes identity. And identity becomes destiny. When you repeatedly imagine a future version of yourself, your brain begins adjusting your attention toward things that align with that version. When you emotionally believe in your worth, your nervous system becomes more comfortable taking risks that match that belief. When you expect success, you behave in subtle ways that increase the likelihood of achieving it. This is not magic. This is conditioning. This is your brain learning what to look for. And this is also why most people fail to manifest what they want. Not because they lack desire, but because their conscious goals are in conflict with their subconscious programming. They say they want wealth, but believe they are bad with money. They say they want love, but believe they are not worthy of it. They say they want success, but fear rejection more than they desire growth. So their brain continues predicting a future based on their deepest beliefs, not their loudest wishes. And no matter how much they visualize, affirm, or hope, their internal programming quietly cancels it out. Because the brain's number one priority is consistency. It wants your future to match your identity. If your identity says you are someone who struggles, your brain will guide your decisions toward struggle. If your identity says you are someone who fails, your brain will guide your behavior toward failure. If your identity says you are average, your brain will resist actions that threaten that comfort zone. This invisible limit is known as your identity ceiling. And until you change it, your external life will keep returning to the same patterns. No matter how hard you try, no matter how motivated you feel, no matter how badly you want something different, your results will not rise above the level of the person you believe yourself to be. So the real question is not, what do you want to attract? The real question is, who do you believe you are capable of becoming? Because manifestation does not begin with action. It begins with identity. The version of you that exists right now has been shaped by repetition, repeated thoughts, repeated experiences, repeated emotional reactions, repeated decisions. Over time, your brain has created neural pathways that represent what is familiar to you. These pathways become your default settings, your automatic responses, your sense of what is normal. If you have spent years thinking you are not confident, your brain has built a pathway for self-doubt. If you have spent years believing success is difficult, your brain has built a pathway for hesitation. If you have spent years expecting rejection, your brain has built a pathway for fear. And here's the problem. Your brain prefers familiarity over improvement. Even if what is familiar is painful, even if what is familiar is limiting, even if what is familiar is keeping you stuck, it would rather keep you in a predictable environment than push you into an uncertain one. So when you attempt to change your life, your brain interprets it as a threat. A new goal feels dangerous. A new habit feels uncomfortable. A new level of confidence feels unnatural. And it responds by pulling you back toward the identity it recognizes. This is why people start new routines and abandon them. Why they set big goals and then procrastinate. Why they want change but resist it at the same time. Their conscious mind wants growth, but their subconscious identity wants safety. And safety often looks like staying the same. This is where manifestation is misunderstood. Many believe that simply thinking positively will change their reality. But thoughts that are not aligned with identity rarely survive for long. You can tell yourself that you are successful, but if your internal programming believes you are not capable, your brain will sabotage actions that contradict that belief. You can repeat affirmations about abundance, but if your emotional conditioning is rooted in scarcity, your behavior will reflect that fear. Real manifestation happens when your subconscious identity begins to accept a new version of yourself as normal. When success feels familiar, when confidence feels natural, when wealth feels deserved. And this happens through repetition. When you repeatedly visualize a future outcome, your brain begins to simulate it as experience. When you repeatedly feel gratitude, your brain begins associating your environment with reward. When you repeatedly act as the person you want to become, your nervous system begins adapting to that identity. Slowly, your prediction model changes. Your brain starts noticing different opportunities. You respond differently in social situations. You take actions you previously avoided. You tolerate discomfort that once stopped you. And over time, your external reality begins to reflect your internal programming. Because your perception has shifted, your decisions have shifted, your habits have shifted, and your identity has shifted. You are no longer operating from the version of you that expected limitation. You are operating from the version that anticipates growth. Your identity ceiling begins to rise, and with it, your results. This is the foundation of manifestation. Not blind belief, but neurological adaptation. Not wishing for change, but becoming someone for whom that change is expected. Once your mind is rewired, your behavior follows. Once your behavior changes, your outcomes follow. And once your outcomes reinforce your new identity, your reality begins to stabilize at a higher level. You are not chasing success anymore. You are becoming the kind of person who naturally creates it. And everything begins with the decision to rewire your mind. Your life is a reflection of your mental architecture. Every decision you make, every opportunity you notice, every risk you take or avoid is shaped by an internal blueprint that already exists inside your mind. This blueprint is your identity, not your name, not your job, not your past, but the internal image you carry about who you are and what you believe is possible for you. Right now, you are living inside the boundaries of that image. You earn within its limits. You attract within its limits. You grow within its limits. You take action within its limits. Because your brain is constantly trying to behave in a way that matches the person you believe yourself to be. If you see yourself as someone who struggles financially, your decisions will quietly support that belief. If you see yourself as someone who lacks confidence, your behavior will reflect hesitation. If you see yourself as someone who is average, your actions will avoid extraordinary risk. This is why change feels difficult. Not because your goals are too big, but because your identity is too small to support them. Your mind is designed to protect consistency. It does not want you to behave like a wealthy person if you believe you are poor. It does not want you to behave like a confident person if you believe you are insecure. It does not want you to behave like a successful person if you believe you are incapable. So before you change your habits, before you change your actions, before you change your environment, you must design your future self. You must create a mental version of the person you intend to become. Someone who already has the wealth you want, the confidence you want, the relationships you want, the wisdom you want. This is not imagination for entertainment. This is imagination for conditioning. Because your brain does not fully distinguish between something that is vividly imagined and something that is physically experienced. When you mentally rehearse an action, the same neural pathways activate as when you physically perform it. When you imagine success, your brain fires patterns associated with achievement. When you imagine confidence, your nervous system responds with reduced threat perception. And when you imagine yourself living a different life, repeatedly, with emotion, your brain begins updating its prediction model. It begins asking, is this possible? Is this familiar? Should I prepare for this? This process is known as visualization, and it is not mystical. It is neurological. Professional athletes use it to improve performance. Leaders use it to prepare for high-pressure decisions. Performers use it to simulate success before stepping onto a stage. Because the brain learns through repetition, and visualization is a form of mental repetition. When you repeatedly imagine a future self, your brain begins adjusting your perception to match it. You start noticing different opportunities. You start interpreting challenges differently. You start responding with behaviors that align with that imagined identity. Over time, the imagined becomes familiar, and the familiar becomes believable, and the believable becomes achievable. This is the beginning of mental architecture, not forcing yourself to act differently, but training your brain to recognize a new version of you as normal. Inside your brain exists a powerful filtering system known as the reticular activating system. The reticular activating system, or RAS, determines what information reaches your conscious awareness. It decides what you notice and what you ignore. Without it, your mind would be overwhelmed by sensory input every second. So it filters reality for you. But here is what most people do not realize. Your RAS does not filter information based on what is objectively important. It filters information based on what it believes is important to you, and it learns what is important from your thoughts. If you constantly think about failure, your RAS highlights risk. If you constantly think about rejection, your RAS highlights social threat. If you constantly think about financial struggle, your RAS highlights scarcity. But if you begin to focus on growth, opportunity, progress, abundance, your RAS begins highlighting different patterns. Suddenly, you notice new possibilities. You see connections you previously ignored. You hear conversations that inspire action. You become aware of pathways that once seemed invisible. Reality has not changed, but your perception of it has. Because your brain has been trained to look for different things. When you design your future self through visualization, you are giving your RAS a new target, a new identity to align with. And your brain begins scanning the environment for anything that supports it. If your future self is confident, your RAS notices situations where you can lead. If your future self is financially successful, your RAS notices opportunities to earn. If your future self is socially magnetic, your RAS notices moments to connect. This is why identity must come before outcome, because outcomes are produced by behavior, and behavior is guided by perception, and perception is filtered by identity. You do not attract success because you want it. You attract success because your identity has been trained to recognize and respond to it. So instead of asking, "How can I become successful?" ask, "Who must I become for success to feel natural?" Because when success becomes part of your identity, your actions begin aligning automatically. You make decisions differently. You tolerate discomfort differently. You take risks differently. Not because you are forcing yourself, but because it feels consistent with who you believe you are. And consistency is what your brain is always seeking. Once you understand that identity shapes perception and perception shapes behavior, the next step is building a high-value self-concept. Your self-concept is the collection of beliefs you hold about yourself. What you think you deserve, what you think you can achieve, what you think you are capable of becoming. If your self-concept is low, you will unconsciously reject opportunities that exceed it. You will feel uncomfortable earning more money than you believe you deserve. You will sabotage relationships that feel too good to be true. You will procrastinate on goals that threaten your sense of familiarity, because your brain is trying to protect your identity. So to change your outcomes, you must raise your self-concept. And the most effective way to do that is future self-integration. This means mentally rehearsing the version of you that already lives the life you want. Take a moment now. Imagine the version of you who has achieved your desired level of success. See how they carry themselves. Notice how they speak. Observe how they respond to pressure. Imagine how they handle money. Imagine how they walk into a room. Imagine how they think when faced with challenge. Now imagine being that person, not watching them, but experiencing the world through their perspective. How do they make decisions? How do they treat themselves? How do they respond to fear? Feel the emotional state that comes with that identity. Confidence, calmness, certainty, gratitude. Let that feeling settle into your nervous system. Because when you repeatedly simulate this experience, your brain begins forming neural pathways associated with it. Your future self stops feeling distant and starts feeling familiar. Over time, your actions begin matching this internal rehearsal. You speak differently. You choose differently. You behave differently. Because your brain is adjusting to maintain consistency with your new identity. This is integration. Not pretending to be someone else, but training your mind to accept a higher version of yourself as normal. And once that version becomes normal, your behavior changes, your perception changes, your opportunities change, and your reality begins to follow. Because you do not become successful by chasing outcomes. You become successful by becoming someone for whom those outcomes are inevitable. Your subconscious mind does not care about what you want. It cares about what you believe. And there is a powerful difference between the two. You may consciously want wealth, success, confidence, love, or recognition. But if your subconscious programming has been shaped by years of fear, doubt, rejection, criticism, or emotional pain, then your internal system will quietly resist any behavior that threatens the identity it has learned to protect. Because your subconscious mind's primary responsibility is not to make you happy, but to keep you safe, and safety to your nervous system often looks like familiarity, even when that familiarity is painful, limiting, or deeply unsatisfying. From the moment you were born, your brain began collecting data. Every experience you had, every comment you heard, every success you celebrated, every failure you endured, every time someone praised you, and every time someone rejected you, created emotional impressions that were stored beneath your conscious awareness, forming patterns that eventually became beliefs about yourself, about other people, about money, about relationships, and about what you are capable of achieving in the world around you. If you repeatedly heard that success is difficult, your brain associated achievement with struggle. If you repeatedly experienced rejection, your brain associated vulnerability with pain. If you repeatedly witnessed financial stress, your brain associated money with anxiety. Over time, These emotional associations transformed into subconscious beliefs, and these beliefs began guiding your perception of reality, influencing how you interpret situations, how you respond to challenges, and how willing you are to take action when opportunity appears in front of you. Fear, doubt, and limiting beliefs are not random thoughts that appear out of nowhere. They are protective responses. Your brain learned that stepping outside your comfort zone may lead to embarrassment. Your nervous system learned that trying something new may result in failure. Your emotional memory learned that trusting people may result in betrayal. So whenever you attempt to grow beyond your current identity, your subconscious mind activates resistance. You hesitate when you should act. You procrastinate when you should decide. You withdraw when you should engage. And you convince yourself that you are not ready, not qualified, or not capable, even when the opportunity is directly in front of you. This is not weakness. This is conditioning. Your brain is repeating patterns that once kept you safe, but what once protected you may now be limiting you. Because the same system that prevents emotional pain also prevents growth. And until you understand how these subconscious beliefs were formed, you will continue trying to change your life at the conscious level, without addressing the programming that is silently shaping your behavior beneath the surface. Beliefs are formed through repetition and emotion. When something happens once, your brain observes it. When something happens repeatedly, your brain begins predicting it. And when something happens repeatedly with emotional intensity, your brain begins expecting it. This is how subconscious beliefs are created. If you experienced repeated criticism growing up, your brain began predicting judgment. If you experienced repeated financial stress, your brain began predicting scarcity. If you experienced repeated failure, your brain began predicting disappointment. And these predictions influence how you interpret new experiences. This is known as cognitive bias. Your brain filters reality in a way that confirms what it already believes. If you believe that people are not trustworthy, you will notice behaviors that validate that belief, while ignoring evidence that contradicts it. If you believe that success is rare, you will interpret challenges as proof that achievement is out of reach. If you believe that you are not attractive, you will focus on signs of rejection, while dismissing signs of interest. This is called confirmation bias. Your mind is not trying to deceive you. It is trying to maintain consistency. And consistency often leads to self-sabotage. You may avoid applying for opportunities that could improve your life. You may delay pursuing relationships that could bring you happiness. You may reject financial growth because it feels unfamiliar. All because your subconscious programming is trying to protect the identity it recognizes. Self-sabotage is not a lack of motivation. It is a subconscious attempt to remain consistent with your internal beliefs. Because if your reality begins to contradict your identity, your nervous system experiences discomfort, and discomfort signals threat. So your mind intervenes. You distract yourself. You doubt yourself. You rationalize an action, and you return to behaviors that align with your existing self-concept. This is why positive thinking alone is not enough. Because thoughts that contradict your beliefs create tension, and your brain resolves that tension by returning to what feels familiar. Until the belief changes, the behavior remains the same. Emotional memory plays a powerful role in shaping subconscious behavior. When you experience an event with strong emotional intensity, your brain stores not just the memory of what happened, but the emotional response associated with it. If you were embarrassed while speaking in public, your brain stored not just the event, but the feeling of shame. If you were rejected in a relationship, your brain stored not just the situation, but the feeling of vulnerability. If you experienced financial instability, your brain stored not just the circumstances, but the feeling of anxiety. These emotional memories create trauma loops. Not always severe trauma, but subtle patterns of emotional learning that influence how you respond to future situations. You may avoid speaking up because your brain anticipates embarrassment. You may avoid intimacy because your brain anticipates rejection. You may avoid financial risk because your brain anticipates loss. And even when your conscious mind knows that the current situation is different from the past, your nervous system reacts as if the threat is still present. Because emotional memory is not logical. It is protective. Your subconscious mind would rather avoid discomfort than pursue possibility. But here is where change becomes possible. Your brain is capable of neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections. This means that beliefs are not permanent. Emotional responses are not fixed, and patterns of fear can be replaced. When you repeatedly challenge a limiting belief, your brain begins weakening the neural pathway associated with it. When you repeatedly act in a way that contradicts fear, your nervous system begins adapting. When you repeatedly experience positive outcomes in situations that once triggered anxiety, your emotional memory begins updating. Over time, the old pattern loses strength, and a new belief begins to form. Replacing limiting beliefs requires conscious awareness. You must first recognize the inner narrative that is guiding your decisions. This is where the inner narrative audit becomes essential. Listen to how you speak to yourself. Notice the assumptions you make. Observe the expectations you hold. Do you believe that success is difficult? Do you believe that people cannot be trusted? Do you believe that you are not capable of achieving your goals? These thoughts are not facts. They are learned interpretations, and they can be rewritten. When you consciously challenge a limiting belief, you interrupt the automatic pattern that has been guiding your behavior. When you replace a negative assumption with a more empowering perspective, you begin forming a new neural pathway. And when you repeat this process consistently, your brain begins accepting the new belief as familiar. This is belief replacement, not through denial, but through repetition. Over time, the inner narrative changes. Fear becomes curiosity, doubt becomes possibility, avoidance becomes action, and hesitation becomes confidence. Because your subconscious mind adapts to what is repeatedly experienced. Once a new belief becomes integrated, your perception shifts. You notice opportunities you once ignored. You take actions you once avoided. You tolerate discomfort that once stopped you. And your behavior begins aligning with the identity you are becoming. This is subconscious rewiring, not forcing yourself to change, but training your mind to expect something different. And once your expectations change, your reality begins to follow. Your emotional state is not just something you feel. It is something that shapes how you think, how you behave, how you make decisions, and ultimately, how your life unfolds over time. Because every single action you take is filtered through your internal state before it becomes behavior. And that internal state is created by a constant interaction between your nervous system, your hormones, your thoughts, and your emotional memory, all of which are working together to create what can be described as your emotional frequency, meaning the overall tone of your internal experience at any given moment. Whether that tone is driven by confidence or insecurity, calmness or anxiety, optimism or fear, certainty or doubt. Most people assume that emotions are reactions to life, that when something good happens, they feel good, and when something bad happens, they feel bad. But in reality, your emotional state often precedes your experience, meaning that how you feel internally changes how you interpret what happens externally, because your brain is constantly evaluating situations based on your current emotional condition. And if your nervous system is already activated by stress, insecurity, or fear, then you will interpret neutral events as threatening, ambiguous events as negative, and challenging situations as overwhelming, which in turn leads to behaviors that reinforce the emotional state you started with. When you feel anxious, you become cautious. When you feel cautious, you avoid risk. When you avoid risk, you limit opportunity. And when opportunity is limited, your results reflect that limitation. This is how emotional states shape outcomes. Your internal condition becomes the lens through which reality is perceived. And this is why mastering your internal state is essential for manifestation. Because if your emotional baseline is dominated by fear, doubt, or scarcity, then your behavior will align with those states, and your results will mirror the actions that those emotions produce, regardless of how much you consciously desire success, growth, or abundance. High-performing individuals do not simply think differently. They feel differently. Their nervous systems are conditioned to tolerate uncertainty. Their emotional baseline supports decision-making under pressure. Their internal state remains stable even when external circumstances are unpredictable. This allows them to act with clarity instead of hesitation, confidence instead of avoidance, commitment instead of procrastination. Your emotional frequency determines whether you interpret a challenge as an opportunity to grow or as a threat to your safety. And this interpretation influences whether you step forward or withdraw, whether you speak up or remain silent, whether you take initiative or wait for permission, meaning that your emotional state is not just influencing your feelings, but your future. Because repeated decisions made under the same emotional conditions eventually create consistent patterns of behavior, and those patterns become your lifestyle. To change your external results, you must first regulate your internal state. Because your emotional frequency determines how you respond to the world, and how you respond determines what you create within it. Your emotional state is deeply influenced by your brain chemistry. Hormones such as dopamine, serotonin, and cortisol interact with your nervous system to regulate motivation, stress response, focus, and reward perception, meaning that the way you feel is not just psychological, but biological, because every time you anticipate a reward, your brain releases dopamine, which increases motivation and encourages you to pursue the behavior associated with that reward, reinforcing the likelihood that you will repeat it in the future. When you set a meaningful goal and visualize achieving it, your brain begins releasing small amounts of dopamine in anticipation of progress, which increases your willingness to take action, your persistence when faced with obstacles, and your overall engagement with the process required to move closer to your desired outcome. But when your emotional state is dominated by fear or stress, a different hormone becomes more active: cortisol. Cortisol is released in response to perceived threat, and its primary function is to prepare your body for survival by increasing alertness, narrowing focus, and prioritizing immediate safety over long-term growth, which is beneficial in genuinely dangerous situations, but problematic when activated by everyday challenges, because when cortisol levels remain elevated for extended periods, your brain becomes more sensitive to negative information, more likely to anticipate failure, and less capable of sustaining motivation toward long-term goals. Fear-based thinking is often a result of chronic cortisol activation. You begin imagining worst-case scenarios. You hesitate before making decisions. You doubt your ability to succeed. And you interpret uncertainty as danger. This shifts your behavior toward avoidance. You delay action. You seek reassurance. You retreat from opportunities that require risk. And even when the potential reward is significant, your nervous system prioritizes emotional safety over progress. Motivation decreases. Confidence weakens. And your emotional frequency becomes dominated by caution. Over time, this pattern becomes familiar. Your brain begins expecting discomfort when pursuing growth. And because familiarity is interpreted as safety, you may unconsciously choose inaction over advancement, simply because it feels less threatening to your emotional equilibrium. To manifest consistently, you must learn to regulate your hormonal response to challenge. You must train your nervous system to interpret discomfort not as danger, but as growth. Because when dopamine-driven motivation outweighs cortisol-driven fear, your behavior begins aligning with your goals instead of your doubts. And this alignment creates momentum. Emotions are not contained within your body alone. They are transmitted through behavior, tone of voice, facial expression, and posture, creating what psychologists refer to as emotional contagion, meaning that your internal state can influence the emotional states of others, and their emotional states can influence yours, often without conscious awareness. Because human beings are neurologically wired to mirror the expressions and behaviors of those around them. When you enter a room feeling confident and composed, your presence can influence the atmosphere. Others may respond with increased openness, increased respect, increased engagement. But when you enter a room feeling anxious or uncertain, those same individuals may become guarded, dismissive, or hesitant. Because emotional states are socially communicated, this is where social energy becomes relevant to manifestation. Your internal frequency affects not only how you perceive opportunities, but how others perceive you. And perception influences interaction, which influences access to resources, information, and collaboration. High-frequency emotional states such as confidence, gratitude, enthusiasm, and calmness are associated with improved performance across various domains, including decision-making, creativity, and resilience. Because when your nervous system is regulated, your brain is more capable of integrating complex information, maintaining focus, and adapting to changing circumstances. You think more clearly. You respond more effectively. You remain engaged even when outcomes are uncertain. This enhances your performance in professional, social, and personal environments. And performance shapes results. Results reinforce identity. Identity influences future emotional states. This creates a feedback loop in which your internal frequency and external outcomes continuously interact, meaning that cultivating high-frequency emotional states is not about maintaining constant positivity, but about developing the ability to recover quickly from negative emotional responses, so that temporary setbacks do not become persistent limitations. Resilience is emotional flexibility, and emotional flexibility supports growth. If emotional states influence perception, behavior, and social interaction, then the ability to shift your state quickly becomes a powerful tool for manifestation. Because even when external circumstances cannot be immediately changed, your internal response to them can be adjusted, allowing you to maintain clarity and motivation in situations that might otherwise trigger fear or hesitation. State shift techniques are methods used to regulate your nervous system in real time. Breathing patterns can influence heart rate variability, reducing cortisol levels and increasing feelings of calmness. Postural adjustments can alter hormonal balance, increasing confidence and reducing stress perception. Focused attention on positive experiences can increase dopamine release, enhancing motivation and engagement. By consciously altering your physical or mental state, you can interrupt automatic emotional responses and create a more adaptive internal environment, which supports decision-making aligned with long-term goals rather than short-term comfort. For example, when faced with a challenging opportunity, you may feel anxiety. But instead of withdrawing, you can pause, regulate your breathing, recall a previous success, and visualize a positive outcome, shifting your emotional state from fear to anticipation. This shift influences behavior. You engage instead of avoiding. You speak instead of remaining silent. You act instead of delaying. And each action taken under a regulated emotional state reinforces your ability to tolerate discomfort in pursuit of growth. Over time, your nervous system adapts. Challenges feel less threatening. Opportunities feel more accessible. And your emotional baseline becomes more supportive of progress. Because manifestation is not about eliminating negative emotions. It is about managing them effectively, so that your internal frequency supports the behaviors required to create the reality you desire. And once your emotional state aligns with your goals, your actions follow. And once your actions align, your outcomes begin to change. You do not attract what you want. You attract what your behavior proves you are ready for. Because your brain is not measuring your intentions. It is measuring your consistency. It is measuring what you repeatedly do, what you repeatedly tolerate, what you repeatedly avoid, and what you repeatedly prioritize. Because your behavior is the physical expression of your internal identity. And every time you take action, you are sending a signal to your nervous system about who you believe yourself to be. Whether that signal reflects courage or hesitation, discipline or procrastination, commitment or avoidance. Many people believe that manifestation is about visualizing outcomes, imagining success, affirming abundance, thinking positively about their future. But without behavioral alignment, visualization remains fantasy. Because your brain learns through evidence. And the strongest evidence available to your brain is your own behavior. When you say you want to be confident, but avoid speaking up in conversations, your brain receives conflicting information. When you say you want financial success, but delay managing your money, your brain receives inconsistent signals. When you say you want growth, but retreat from discomfort, your nervous system interprets that discomfort as danger. And over time, this inconsistency weakens belief. Because belief is reinforced by action, you begin doubting your own goals, questioning your own potential, and interpreting challenges as confirmation that change is not possible. This is why action determines attraction. Because action creates evidence, and evidence shapes belief. When you repeatedly act in alignment with your desired identity, your brain begins updating its internal model of who you are, making that identity feel more familiar and therefore more believable, which reduces resistance and increases motivation. Because once your nervous system accepts a behavior as consistent with your identity, it requires less effort to repeat it. Attraction is not the result of desire. It is the result of behavioral congruence. When your thoughts, emotions, and actions align with a specific outcome, your nervous system becomes more comfortable pursuing it. Your perception becomes more sensitive to opportunities related to it, and your decisions begin reflecting a commitment to its attainment. You are not attracting success through thought alone. You are attracting it through the actions that thought inspires. And without those actions, your internal programming remains unchanged. Human beings are driven by the need for self-consistency. Your brain wants your actions to match your beliefs, and it wants your beliefs to match your actions. Because inconsistency creates psychological tension. If you believe you are disciplined but behave impulsively, your brain experiences discomfort. If you believe you are capable but avoid challenge, your nervous system detects a mismatch. And this mismatch produces cognitive dissonance. To resolve this dissonance, your brain will either change your behavior to match your belief or change your belief to justify your behavior. And most often, it chooses the latter. If you repeatedly procrastinate, you may begin believing that you lack motivation. If you repeatedly avoid risk, you may begin believing that you are not capable. If you repeatedly withdraw from opportunity, you may begin believing that success is not meant for you. This belief adjustment protects your sense of identity, because it is easier to change what you think about yourself than to change what you do. But when you consciously take action that contradicts your limiting beliefs, the opposite process occurs. If you speak up despite fear, your brain begins reconsidering your confidence. If you pursue opportunity despite doubt, your nervous system begins reconsidering your competence. If you maintain discipline despite discomfort, your brain begins updating its prediction about your resilience. Over time, consistent action reshapes belief, and reshaped belief influences perception, and perception influences future action. This is how micro-decisions change destiny. Because every small action you take either reinforces your current identity or challenges it. Choosing to act despite hesitation. Choosing to persist despite uncertainty. Choosing to commit despite discomfort. Each of these decisions provides evidence that contradicts limiting beliefs, allowing new patterns to form. And as these patterns repeat, they create behavioral momentum. Momentum reduces resistance. Resistance decreases hesitation. And hesitation becomes confidence. Not because confidence appeared suddenly, but because it was built through consistent action. Motivation is temporary. Discipline is sustainable. Motivation depends on emotional state. When you feel inspired, energized, or optimistic, you are more likely to take action. But emotional states fluctuate. Stress, fatigue, distraction, or doubt can reduce motivation. And when motivation decreases, behavior often follows. Discipline, however, is not dependent on emotional state. It is dependent on commitment. It is the decision to act regardless of how you feel, to maintain consistency even when discomfort is present, to prioritize long-term outcomes over short-term relief. When behavior becomes habitual, it requires less conscious effort. And when habits align with your desired identity, they support manifestation. Because discipline transforms intention into routine, routine into pattern, pattern into identity, and identity into outcome. Embodied identity is the process of behaving as the person you want to become before external evidence confirms that identity. Not pretending, but practicing. Practicing confidence by speaking up. Practicing discipline by following through. Practicing resilience by persisting. Each behavior sends a signal to your nervous system that this identity is safe. And over time, safety becomes familiarity. Familiarity becomes comfort. And comfort becomes automatic. You do not need to feel confident to act confidently. You need to act confidently to feel confident. Because action precedes emotion, and behavior precedes belief. Your brain adapts to what you repeatedly do, not what you occasionally intend. Alignment occurs when your actions consistently reflect your goals, when your behavior matches your intentions, when your decisions support your desired identity. And this alignment creates coherence within your nervous system, because inconsistency generates tension, but consistency generates stability. The alignment blueprint begins with clarity. Define the identity you want to embody. Determine the behaviors associated with that identity, and commit to practicing those behaviors consistently, even when discomfort arises, even when motivation fades, even when progress is slow. Because repetition creates neural pathways, and neural pathways create habit. Habit reduces resistance, and reduced resistance supports consistent action. As your behavior aligns with your identity, your perception shifts. Opportunities become more visible, challenges become more manageable, and progress becomes more sustainable. Your nervous system adapts to the demands of growth, and growth becomes familiar. You are no longer forcing change. You are embodying it. Because manifestation is not achieved by wishing for outcomes. It is achieved by aligning behavior with identity. And once alignment is established, your actions support your goals. Your goals support your identity. And your identity shapes your reality. One of the most misunderstood aspects of manifestation is the idea of letting go. Because on the surface, it appears contradictory. You are told to focus on what you want, to visualize it clearly, to feel emotionally connected to it, to act in alignment with it. And then suddenly, you are told to detach from it, to release your need for it, to stop obsessing over when it will happen. This creates confusion, because your mind interprets letting go as giving up, and giving up feels like failure. But strategic detachment is not about abandoning your desire. It is about releasing your emotional dependence on its outcome, because when your sense of happiness, security, or self-worth becomes tied to whether or not something happens, Your nervous system interprets uncertainty as threat, and threat activates fear-based thinking, which alters perception, narrows attention, and reduces behavioral flexibility. The paradox of letting go lies in this truth. The more emotionally attached you are to an outcome, the more pressure you place on yourself to control it. The more pressure you place on yourself, the more anxiety you experience. The more anxiety you experience, the more your nervous system shifts into a defensive state. And when your brain enters a defensive state, it prioritizes safety over growth, meaning you begin avoiding risk. You overanalyze decisions. You hesitate when action is required, and you interpret uncertainty as danger. Your desire turns into obsession, and obsession turns into tension. Tension reduces performance, and reduced performance limits results. This is why excessive attachment often delays manifestation, because the energy behind your pursuit shifts from confidence to desperation, from curiosity to fear, from commitment to control. You are no longer moving toward something. You are trying to prevent losing it. And this emotional pressure affects your behavior. You check for progress constantly. You worry about outcomes prematurely. You interpret delays as rejection. And you make decisions based on urgency rather than clarity. Detachment interrupts this cycle. By releasing your emotional dependence on the outcome, you reduce internal pressure. You create space for adaptability. You allow uncertainty to exist without triggering fear. And you maintain the flexibility required to respond effectively to changing circumstances. Strategic detachment is not passive. It is regulated engagement. You remain committed to the process, but you are not defined by the result. You pursue the goal, but your identity is not threatened if it takes time. You care about the outcome, but you are not emotionally controlled by it. And this emotional regulation supports consistent behavior, which supports progress, which supports manifestation. Obsession often disguises itself as dedication. On the surface, it can feel like intense focus, commitment, or even passion, but psychologically, obsession is not a stable form of engagement with your goals. It is a stress response that emerges when your sense of emotional safety becomes tied to a specific outcome, meaning that the achievement of that outcome begins to represent not just success, but relief, validation, acceptance, or even self-worth. And once this emotional link is established, your nervous system starts interpreting uncertainty around that outcome as a potential threat, which activates a constant state of internal vigilance. When you become obsessed with a result, your attention narrows in a way that feels productive but is often counterproductive, because instead of engaging with the process that leads to growth, your mind becomes preoccupied with evaluating progress, monitoring signs of success, and interpreting every delay as a signal of possible failure, which increases emotional tension and reduces cognitive flexibility, making it harder for you to adapt, experiment, or take creative risks that might move you closer to your goal in unexpected ways. This pattern is deeply connected to the difference between scarcity and abundance mindsets. A scarcity mindset is rooted in the belief that opportunities are limited, that success is rare, that time is running out, and that if something does not happen soon, it may never happen at all. And when this belief becomes active, your brain begins scanning for evidence of lack, noticing delays, obstacles, and competition more readily than possibilities or alternative pathways, which reinforces the perception that resources are insufficient and that urgency is necessary. Urgency then drives behavior. You may attempt to force outcomes, rush decisions, overcommit to strategies that are not working, or become resistant to changing direction, even when new information suggests that adaptation is needed. This rigidity is a byproduct of fear, because when you believe that there is only one opportunity, one timeline, or one acceptable result, Any deviation from your plan feels like a threat to your future, and your nervous system responds by tightening control, narrowing focus, and increasing emotional reactivity. You begin checking constantly for signs that your efforts are paying off, comparing your progress to others, interpreting neutral feedback as negative, and questioning your own competence whenever results are not immediate. This creates a feedback loop. Scarcity increases pressure. Pressure increases anxiety. Anxiety reduces performance. Reduced performance delays results. And delayed results reinforce scarcity. In contrast, an abundance mindset assumes that opportunities can arise in multiple forms, at different times, and through pathways that may not be immediately visible, allowing your nervous system to remain regulated even when progress is uncertain, because the absence of immediate success is not interpreted as permanent lack, but as part of a longer process of development. This shift in perception changes behavior. You become more willing to experiment, more open to feedback, more tolerant of temporary setbacks, and more capable of maintaining consistent effort over time, because your emotional stability is not dependent on immediate validation. You can pursue a goal with commitment without demanding instant confirmation that your efforts are working, and this reduces the likelihood of burnout, because obsession often leads to exhaustion. When every delay feels threatening, when every obstacle feels personal, when every moment of uncertainty feels like failure, your nervous system remains in a state of heightened activation, which consumes cognitive resources that would otherwise support creativity, problem-solving, and resilience. Detachment interrupts this cycle by allowing you to remain invested in the outcome without becoming emotionally controlled by it, which means you can care deeply about your goals while also accepting that progress may occur gradually, that timelines may shift, and that alternative strategies may be required. You are still committed, but you are not consumed. You still act, but you are not reacting. And this distinction supports adaptability. When you are not fixated on a single pathway, you are more likely to notice opportunities that do not match your initial expectations, to collaborate with others who offer new perspectives, and to adjust your approach in response to changing circumstances, all of which increase the probability of success. Because manifestation is not simply about holding a vision. It is about responding effectively to reality as it unfolds. And obsession often prevents effective response by narrowing perception and increasing emotional volatility. Abundance mindset expands perception by reducing fear of loss and allowing you to tolerate uncertainty without withdrawing effort. You can continue moving forward even when the destination is not yet visible. And this sustained engagement creates momentum. Momentum supports progress. Progress reinforces belief, and belief influences future behavior. In this way, detachment does not diminish your pursuit. It stabilizes it. By reducing the emotional pressure that turns commitment into compulsion and allowing your nervous system to operate in a state that supports growth rather than survival, ensuring that your actions remain aligned with your long-term goals rather than driven by short-term anxiety. Attachment is not limited to people. It also applies to outcomes, to goals, to expectations, to imagined futures. And once your mind becomes emotionally attached to a particular result, that result begins to represent more than just an achievement. It begins to symbolize safety, validation, stability, or worth, meaning that your nervous system starts associating the attainment of that outcome with emotional relief and its absence with potential threat, which activates protective mechanisms designed to reduce uncertainty, even if those mechanisms interfere with growth. Attachment theory explains how early emotional experiences shape your expectations of security, connection, and stability. And although it is most often discussed in the context of relationships, Its principles extend to your interaction with goals and ambitions, because when you become attached to something, you are not just invested in its success, you are invested in what it represents about you. If success represents approval, then failure represents rejection. If wealth represents security, then financial uncertainty represents danger. If recognition represents worth, then invisibility represents inadequacy. And once this emotional link is formed, your pursuit of the outcome becomes less about progress and more about protection. You are not trying to achieve something. You are trying to avoid losing something. And avoidance is driven by fear. This fear alters perception. You may become overly sensitive to feedback, interpreting constructive criticism as evidence of failure. You may hesitate before taking risks, because the possibility of loss feels intolerable. You may attempt to control variables that are outside your influence, hoping to reduce uncertainty. Or you may withdraw from opportunities entirely, choosing emotional safety over potential growth. All of these responses are attempts to regulate threat, but they also limit adaptability. Secure attachment allows for engagement without dependence. You can invest effort in a goal without needing its attainment to validate your identity. You can pursue progress without fearing loss. You can experience setbacks without interpreting them as personal inadequacy. This balanced engagement supports resilience. You are able to persist through difficulty, adjust strategies when necessary, and remain open to change, because your sense of self is not contingent on immediate success. Detachment without indifference means caring deeply about your aspirations while also accepting that their realization may require time, experimentation, and flexibility. It means remaining committed without becoming consumed. You are engaged with the process, but not controlled by the outcome. And this emotional regulation supports consistent behavior, because when your nervous system is not overwhelmed by fear of loss, it can tolerate discomfort in pursuit of growth. You can act despite uncertainty. You can adapt when plans change. And you can maintain motivation even when results are not immediate, because your self-worth is not at risk. This stability enhances performance. You think more clearly, respond more effectively, and remain engaged even when progress is gradual, which supports sustained effort. Sustained effort produces incremental gains. Incremental gains reinforce belief, and reinforced belief strengthens identity, creating a feedback loop in which detachment enhances manifestation rather than hindering it. Because when your pursuit is driven by curiosity rather than fear, commitment rather than compulsion, your behavior remains aligned with long-term goals instead of short-term emotional relief. You are not attempting to control every outcome. You are participating in the process of growth. And this participation allows progress to unfold without resistance. Because resistance often arises from fear of loss. And detachment reduces that fear by separating your identity from any single result. You are still invested, but you are not dependent. You still care, but you are not destabilized by delay. And this balanced state allows you to remain adaptable, resilient, and engaged, ensuring that your actions continue supporting your goals even when circumstances are uncertain, which is essential for manifestation. Because growth requires uncertainty, and uncertainty requires emotional stability, which detachment provides. Releasing attachment is not a passive act. It is an intentional psychological intervention designed to restore cognitive flexibility, emotional regulation, and behavioral alignment when fixation on outcomes begins to disrupt your capacity to think clearly, act effectively, or remain resilient in the face of uncertainty. Because the longer the mind clings to a specific result as the only acceptable resolution, the more it narrows its perception of available pathways, reducing creativity, limiting adaptability, and increasing emotional Volatility whenever progress does not unfold exactly as anticipated. This is why strategic detachment is not about abandoning ambition. It is about disengaging from the illusion that control over timing, form, or method is necessary for success. Because when you demand that something must happen in a specific way or within a specific time frame in order for you to feel safe, validated, or complete, you unintentionally create psychological tension that manifests as impatience, frustration, and anxiety, all of which activate stress responses that interfere with decision-making, emotional stability, and long-term motivation. The release protocol begins with awareness. You must first identify where emotional investment has transformed into emotional dependence. This often appears as urgency, rumination, comparison, or a persistent fear that without this specific outcome your future will collapse. When your thoughts repeatedly circle around a single desired result, imagining worst-case scenarios in its absence, your nervous system interprets the situation as unstable, even if there is no immediate threat, triggering the amygdala to maintain vigilance and increasing cortisol production, which shifts your cognitive resources toward protection rather than exploration. In this state, you may attempt to force progress through excessive effort, seek reassurance from external validation, or avoid taking risks that could disrupt the fragile possibility of success, none of which support sustainable growth. The next step involves cognitive reframing. You must consciously redefine what the outcome represents. Instead of viewing success as the source of your worth, stability, or happiness, you reframe it as an opportunity rather than a requirement, allowing your identity to remain intact regardless of timing or result, which reduces emotional threat and restores autonomy. You begin to understand that while achievement may enhance your life, it does not define your value, and therefore its delay or absence does not signal inadequacy. This separation allows the prefrontal cortex to reassume control over behavior, enabling more rational decision-making and reducing impulsive responses driven by fear of loss. Emotional regulation techniques further support this process. Practices such as controlled breathing, mindfulness, or somatic awareness reduce physiological arousal, signaling safety to the nervous system and allowing stress hormones to decrease, which improves attention, memory, and executive function, all of which are necessary for consistent action. When your body is calm, your perception widens. You notice alternative strategies. You adapt to feedback, and you remain engaged with the process rather than consumed by the result. This engagement fosters intrinsic motivation. You act because the behavior aligns with your values and identity, not because it guarantees immediate reward. Over time, this reduces the compulsive need for external validation. You are able to tolerate uncertainty without interpreting it as failure. You can pursue opportunities without demanding certainty of outcome. And you can persist through difficulty without catastrophic thinking. Behavioral flexibility is the final component of the release protocol. You must remain willing to adjust your approach when new information emerges. This does not mean abandoning your goal. It means recognizing that the path to its realization may involve experimentation, iteration, or unexpected change. Attachment often resists this adaptability, preferring familiar strategies even when they are ineffective because change introduces uncertainty. Detachment allows you to evaluate progress objectively. If a method is not producing results, you modify it without interpreting the need for change as evidence of personal inadequacy. You remain committed to the vision, but flexible in execution. This flexibility enhances resilience. You recover more quickly from setbacks. You remain open to opportunity. And you sustain motivation even when progress is gradual. Because your emotional stability does not depend on immediate confirmation. Instead, it is grounded in your identity and values. You trust your capacity to adapt, and this trust reduces fear. When fear decreases, creativity increases. You are more willing to explore alternative solutions, to collaborate, to innovate, and to take calculated risks, which supports long-term success. Strategic detachment, therefore, becomes an active process of maintaining engagement while preventing emotional dependence. You invest effort without sacrificing stability. You pursue goals without compromising identity. And you remain committed without demanding certainty. This balance ensures that your behavior remains aligned with growth, even when outcomes are delayed. Because you are not attempting to control every variable. You are participating in a dynamic process. And this participation allows progress to unfold naturally, without resistance created by fear or urgency. Ultimately, releasing attachment restores autonomy. You are no longer driven by the need to secure validation through achievement. You act because the behavior reflects who you are becoming. And this alignment sustains motivation, resilience, and adaptability over time, allowing your goals to emerge through consistent action rather than forced effort. You are still striving, but not struggling, still committed, but not consumed. And this psychological freedom enhances performance, creativity, and persistence, ensuring that your actions continue supporting your long-term aspirations even when circumstances are uncertain. Because you are no longer dependent on immediate outcomes for emotional stability. You are grounded in identity and guided by intention. Influence is one of the most misunderstood forms of power because most people assume that attraction is something that happens randomly, unpredictably, or purely based on physical appearance, when in reality attraction is a deeply psychological and neurological response that is shaped by perception, emotional signaling, behavioral consistency, and subtle cues that communicate confidence, competence, and certainty at levels that often bypass conscious awareness, meaning that long before someone decides whether they like you, trust you, or feel drawn toward you, their nervous system has already assessed your presence, your posture, your tone, your emotional stability, and your perceived social value through mechanisms that evolved for survival rather than social politeness. Human beings are constantly scanning their environment for signals that indicate safety, opportunity, or threat, and this scanning process occurs automatically through neural systems that prioritize individuals who appear capable of influencing resources, navigating challenges, or maintaining emotional control under pressure, because from an evolutionary standpoint, aligning with someone who demonstrates competence and composure increased the likelihood of survival, meaning that attraction is often less about surface-level charm and more about subconscious assessments of capability, stability, and resilience. This is why some individuals appear naturally magnetic even without trying. Their behavior aligns with internal certainty. Their communication is congruent. Their emotional responses are regulated, and their actions signal independence rather than neediness. This combination creates psychological safety for others, because people tend to gravitate toward individuals who appear grounded and self-directed rather than those who seem dependent on external approval. Attraction, therefore, becomes a function of perceived self-sufficiency. When you are not seeking validation, attention, or reassurance from those around you, your behavior communicates stability, which reduces social tension and allows others to engage without fear of emotional obligation or unpredictability. Social power is built on this stability. It emerges when your internal state remains consistent regardless of external feedback, meaning that praise does not inflate your sense of self and criticism does not diminish it, allowing your behavior to remain aligned with your values rather than reactive to momentary approval or rejection. This consistency signals trustworthiness. Others know what to expect from you. And predictability fosters confidence. Confidence fosters influence. Because when people believe that your actions are guided by intention rather than impulse, they are more likely to consider your perspective, follow your lead, or invest in your vision. Dark magnetism begins with this foundation of self-regulation. It is not about manipulation or control. It is about the quiet authority that arises when your emotional responses are not dictated by the need to impress, persuade, or dominate, but by an internal sense of direction that remains stable even in uncertain situations. When your presence communicates that you are comfortable with yourself, your environment, and your trajectory, others interpret this comfort as competence. And competence attracts attention because it reduces ambiguity. In social dynamics, ambiguity often triggers anxiety. People are uncertain about how to respond, what to expect, or whether engagement will be rewarding or risky. But when someone displays clarity of intention, emotional steadiness, and behavioral congruence, the social environment becomes easier to navigate. Others feel more at ease, and ease encourages interaction. Interaction allows influence to develop. Influence then shapes perception. Perception shapes opportunity. And opportunity reinforces status. Status in this context does not necessarily refer to wealth or formal authority. It refers to perceived social value. The extent to which others believe that your presence enhances their environment, improves decision-making, or contributes to collective success. High-status individuals often demonstrate calm under pressure, decisiveness in uncertainty, and the ability to maintain composure during conflict, all of which signal leadership potential and emotional maturity. These signals are processed rapidly by observers, influencing trust, respect, and willingness to cooperate long before explicit judgments are formed. Understanding this process allows you to cultivate attraction intentionally rather than hoping it occurs by chance. You can regulate your internal state, align your behavior with your values, and communicate through posture, tone, and action that you are capable of navigating challenges independently. This independence reduces perceived burden. Others do not feel responsible for your emotional stability, and therefore engagement becomes less risky. They can connect without fear of being required to compensate for insecurity or unpredictability. This dynamic supports deeper relationships, more effective collaboration, and increased influence, because your presence becomes associated with reliability rather than volatility. Magnetism therefore emerges from alignment. Your thoughts, emotions, and actions communicate the same message. You are stable. You are directed. You are capable. And this coherence is perceived instinctively by those around you, guiding attraction at levels that often remain outside conscious awareness. Attraction is not solely determined by conscious preference. It is shaped by neurological processes that evaluate compatibility, safety, and potential reward through rapid assessments of behavior, appearance, and communication style, many of which occur before an individual becomes aware of their own response, meaning that what feels like an intuitive connection is often the result of subconscious pattern recognition informed by prior experience, cultural conditioning, and biological predispositions. The psychology of attraction involves reward pathways in the brain that respond to novelty, confidence, and perceived social value, activating dopaminergic systems that increase motivation, attention, and emotional engagement when interacting with individuals who appear capable of providing positive outcomes, whether those outcomes involve companionship, collaboration, or shared success. Confidence plays a central role in this process. When someone behaves as though they expect positive engagement, their communication becomes more fluid, their posture more open, and their decision-making more decisive, all of which signal competence and reduce uncertainty for others, making interaction more rewarding and less cognitively demanding. Reduced cognitive demand enhances comfort. Comfort increases willingness to engage, and engagement strengthens attraction. This dynamic explains why individuals who maintain emotional regulation often appear more appealing than those who display fluctuating or reactive behavior. Consistency allows others to anticipate responses, reducing social risk. When risk is low, curiosity increases. Curiosity promotes exploration, and exploration fosters connection. Masculine and feminine polarity dynamics further influence attraction by shaping behavioral expectations related to initiative, receptivity, stability, and adaptability, though these traits are not confined to biological sex and can be expressed by any individual depending on context, meaning that polarity emerges from complementary interaction styles rather than rigid identity categories. Masculine energy is often associated with direction, structure, and assertiveness, while feminine energy is linked to intuition, responsiveness, and relational awareness. And when these dynamics interact effectively, they create tension that enhances engagement, allowing collaboration to feel balanced rather than competitive. Polarity thrives on contrast. If both individuals attempt to dominate, conflict may arise. If both avoid initiative, progress may stall. But when one provides direction and the other offers adaptability, interaction becomes dynamic and mutually reinforcing. This does not imply hierarchy. It reflects coordination. Each role supports the other, and effective coordination increases satisfaction. Understanding polarity allows you to adjust behavior to complement rather than compete with those around you, enhancing cooperation and attraction. When individuals feel that interaction with you reduces effort or increases opportunity, they are more likely to maintain engagement. This perception influences social networks, professional relationships, and collaborative ventures. Because attraction extends beyond romantic contexts, it affects trust, credibility, and willingness to invest time or resources. When your presence signals competence and emotional stability, others may infer that collaboration will be beneficial, and this inference supports influence. Influence in this sense is not coercive. It arises from perceived value. When your behavior consistently aligns with goals, principles, and social expectations, you become easier to trust. Trust supports cooperation. Cooperation enhances outcomes, and outcomes reinforce perception, creating a cycle in which attraction leads to influence. Influence leads to opportunity, and opportunity strengthens status. Status then shapes future interactions. People may approach you with respect, seek your input, or align with your initiatives because your past behavior has demonstrated reliability. This reliability reduces perceived risk, and reduced risk encourages engagement. Magnetism, therefore, involves behavioral congruence as much as emotional regulation. Your actions must support your stated intentions. Your communication must reflect your internal state, and your decisions must align with your goals. When these elements are coherent, attraction becomes sustainable rather than fleeting. Others remain engaged because interaction continues to provide clarity, stability, and mutual benefit, which supports long-term influence and social power. Status, dominance, and presence are rarely communicated through explicit declarations of authority, and instead they are perceived through a network of subtle behavioral signals that the human brain evaluates automatically in order to determine who in a given environment appears competent, stable, self-directed, and capable of navigating uncertainty without emotional collapse. Meaning that long before someone consciously decides whether they respect, trust, or feel influenced by you, their nervous system has already formed a preliminary judgment based on how you carry yourself, how you respond under pressure, how consistently your words match your actions, and whether your emotional state appears grounded or reactive in situations that would typically provoke anxiety, hesitation, or defensiveness. Dominance in psychological terms does not mean intimidation or aggression, because aggressive displays often signal insecurity or instability rather than competence, and true behavioral dominance is instead reflected in calm decisiveness, boundary clarity, and the ability to remain emotionally neutral in environments that are socially competitive or unpredictable, which allows you to communicate that your actions are guided by intention rather than impulse, reducing ambiguity for those around you and making interaction with you feel structured, predictable, and therefore less risky, since unpredictability is often interpreted by the brain as potential threat. When your decisions are consistent and your communication reflects confidence without hostility, others begin to infer that you possess internal stability, and this inference increases perceived social value, because stability suggests that you are capable of contributing to group cohesion rather than disrupting it through emotional volatility or indecision. And as a result, people become more receptive to your perspective, more willing to cooperate with your initiatives, and more inclined to assign credibility to your suggestions even in the absence of formal authority or hierarchical power. Presence amplifies this dynamic by signaling attentional control, which refers to your ability to remain fully engaged with the current interaction rather than becoming distracted by internal rumination, self-doubt, or external stimuli. Because when you are present, you process social cues more accurately, respond more appropriately, and maintain eye contact, posture, and tone that communicate interest without desperation and attentiveness without neediness, allowing others to feel acknowledged rather than evaluated, which reduces defensive responses and encourages openness in communication. This openness facilitates trust. Trust facilitates cooperation, and cooperation facilitates influence. Because individuals are more likely to align with someone who appears both attentive and emotionally regulated than with someone who seems preoccupied, anxious, or overly eager for approval, all of which can be interpreted as signs of instability or hidden agenda. Subtle influence develops through these consistent interactions over time. It does not rely on persuasion tactics or strategic manipulation. It emerges from behavioral reliability. When your internal state remains aligned with your external communication, your intentions become easier to interpret. Others know what to expect from you. And predictability reduces cognitive load during interaction. When people do not need to continuously evaluate whether your behavior is trustworthy or consistent, they can allocate more attention to collaborative tasks or shared goals, which enhances efficiency and mutual satisfaction. Manipulation attempts to bypass this process by exploiting cognitive biases or emotional vulnerabilities, often through exaggeration, omission, or strategic ambiguity. And while such tactics may generate short-term compliance, they typically erode trust once recognized, creating long-term resistance that limits influence and damages relationships. Subtle influence, by contrast, relies on congruence. Your communication reflects your genuine perspective. Your actions align with your stated goals, and your emotional responses remain proportionate to situational demands. This congruence allows others to interpret your behavior as authentic rather than performative. Authenticity increases credibility. Credibility enhances receptivity, and receptivity supports collaboration. Becoming energetically magnetic, therefore, involves cultivating internal coherence rather than external performance, meaning that your thoughts, emotions, and actions must communicate a unified message that reflects competence, independence, and emotional stability, allowing attraction to emerge as a byproduct of alignment rather than as the result of deliberate persuasion. When your internal dialogue supports confidence and your behavior demonstrates consistency, your presence begins to influence group dynamics automatically, stabilizing interaction patterns and encouraging cooperation without requiring explicit effort to command attention or assert dominance. Because the perception of reliability often generates influence more effectively than overt displays of authority. Over time, these behavioral patterns establish expectations. Others anticipate that your responses will remain measured, your decisions will remain intentional, and your engagement will remain consistent even when circumstances become uncertain. This anticipation reduces perceived risk. Reduced risk increases willingness to invest time, energy, or resources in shared initiatives. And this willingness strengthens your position within social networks, enhancing your capacity to attract opportunity, collaboration, and support in both professional and personal contexts. Magnetism, therefore, becomes a function of sustained alignment between identity and behavior, ensuring that your influence is built on trust rather than coercion and maintained through consistency rather than control, allowing your presence to guide perception and engagement in ways that support long-term success without requiring manipulation or performative dominance. Energetic magnetism is often spoken about as though it were an invisible or mystical force, but from a psychological and behavioral perspective, it reflects the cumulative impact of emotional regulation, attentional control, and congruent action patterns that signal to others that your internal state is stable, your intentions are clear, and your behavior is unlikely to fluctuate unpredictably under pressure, meaning that when someone interacts with you, their nervous system is continuously evaluating whether engagement will increase safety, opportunity, or emotional strain. And this evaluation occurs rapidly through nonverbal cues such as facial expression, vocal tone, posture, pacing of speech, and responsiveness to feedback. When your internal emotional environment is regulated, your nonverbal signals become synchronized with your verbal communication, reducing inconsistency that might otherwise trigger doubt or mistrust in observers. Because the human brain is highly sensitive to discrepancies between what is said and what is expressed through behavior. And when these channels conflict, cognitive dissonance arises in the observer, prompting caution or withdrawal. Alignment between internal intention and external action, therefore, enhances credibility. Credibility enhances perceived competence, and perceived competence supports attraction across multiple contexts, including professional collaboration, social connection, and leadership dynamics. Emotional contagion plays a central role in sustaining this magnetism. People tend to mirror the affective states of those around them through automatic neural processes that facilitate empathy and social coordination, meaning that your mood, level of calm, and behavioral pacing can influence the emotional climate of an interaction without conscious effort from either party. If you remain composed in stressful situations, others may experience reduced anxiety simply through exposure to your regulated state, because their nervous systems interpret your calm as evidence that the environment is manageable. This interpretation shifts their physiological response from vigilance toward engagement. Engagement increases openness, and openness enhances cooperation. Over time, repeated exposure to a stable emotional presence conditions others to associate interaction with you as safe and rewarding, which increases the likelihood that they will seek your input, trust your judgment, or align with your initiatives. Maintaining this influence requires consistency. If your emotional responses vary dramatically across similar situations, predictability decreases, and decreased predictability increases perceived risk. Others may hesitate to collaborate because they cannot anticipate how you will respond under pressure. But when your behavior remains aligned with your stated values regardless of context, your presence becomes associated with reliability rather than volatility. Reliability reduces cognitive load for those around you. They do not need to monitor for sudden shifts in mood or intention. This allows attention to remain focused on shared goals rather than interpersonal management. As shared goals become easier to pursue, group efficiency improves, and improved outcomes reinforce the perception that collaboration with you is beneficial. This perception influences future decisions. Opportunities may be offered more readily. Responsibilities may be delegated with greater confidence, and social networks may expand through recommendation or endorsement. Magnetism therefore develops as a feedback loop in which internal alignment shapes external perception, external perception shapes opportunity, and opportunity reinforces status within social environments. Status in this context reflects perceived value rather than imposed hierarchy. It emerges when others consistently observe behavior that supports collective success, emotional stability, or adaptive problem-solving. Such observations guide expectations. Expectations influence interaction patterns, and interaction patterns determine influence. If your presence consistently contributes to clarity, coordination, or emotional balance, your social value increases. Others may defer to your judgment during uncertainty or seek your leadership during complex tasks, not because you demand authority, but because your behavior has demonstrated competence over time. Sustaining this dynamic requires ongoing self-regulation. You must monitor your internal dialogue, ensuring that thoughts support rather than undermine behavioral consistency. Negative rumination or self-doubt can disrupt emotional stability, altering tone or posture in ways that others may interpret as hesitation or insecurity. By maintaining awareness of these internal processes, you can adjust your responses before they influence interaction quality. This adjustment preserves alignment between intention and behavior. Alignment enhances authenticity. Authenticity supports trust, and trust sustains influence. Ultimately, becoming energetically magnetic involves integrating emotional regulation, behavioral congruence, and attentional focus so that your presence communicates reliability without effort, allowing attraction to arise from stability rather than performance and influence to develop through cooperation rather than coercion. You remain engaged with your environment, responsive to feedback, and adaptable in strategy, while maintaining an internal state that is not dependent on immediate validation or external approval, ensuring that your actions continue to reflect long-term goals rather than short-term emotional impulses. This integration supports resilience. Resilience supports persistence. And persistence enhances the likelihood that opportunities aligned with your objectives will emerge over time, reinforcing the perception that your presence contributes to success, clarity, and collective progress. Because your influence is not imposed, it is inferred through consistent interaction. And this inference allows magnetism to sustain itself through trust, predictability, and aligned intention rather than manipulation or control. Gratitude conditioning begins with the understanding that the human brain is fundamentally biased toward detecting problems rather than possibilities, because from an evolutionary perspective, survival depended far more on identifying threats quickly than on appreciating safety slowly, which means that unless you deliberately intervene in your patterns of attention, your nervous system will automatically prioritize what is missing, uncertain, or potentially dangerous over what is stable, supportive, or already working in your favor, reinforcing internal narratives that emphasize scarcity, comparison, and limitation in ways that shape how you interpret opportunities, assess risks, and engage with environments that could otherwise support growth in wealth, relationships, or creative capacity. This bias operates through predictive processing. Your brain continuously generates expectations about the future based on prior experience, filtering incoming sensory information to confirm those expectations rather than evaluating each situation objectively. And when those expectations are dominated by assumptions of insufficiency or disadvantage, your cognitive systems allocate attention toward confirming evidence, highlighting obstacles while minimizing advantages, amplifying competition while overlooking collaboration, and reinforcing beliefs that success is rare, fragile, or reserved for others rather than attainable through sustained effort and strategic alignment. Over time, this perceptual pattern becomes self-reinforcing. You notice barriers more readily than openings. You interpret neutral feedback as negative. You hesitate before pursuing initiatives that involve uncertainty. And hesitation reduces exposure to beneficial experiences that might otherwise contradict scarcity-based assumptions. Gratitude interrupts this cycle by shifting attentional priority toward existing resources, incremental progress, and supportive conditions that are often dismissed as insignificant simply because they do not match idealized expectations of dramatic success. When you consciously acknowledge these elements, you activate neural circuits associated with positive appraisal, teaching your reticular activating system to register abundance with the same urgency that it registers threat, thereby expanding the range of stimuli that enter conscious awareness. As awareness expands, perception becomes more balanced. You begin to notice opportunities that were previously filtered out. You recognize patterns of support within professional networks or personal relationships. And you interpret challenges as informational rather than catastrophic. This shift enhances cognitive flexibility. Flexible cognition improves problem solving. Improved problem solving increases the probability of effective action. And effective action generates measurable progress in domains that contribute to long-term wealth and opportunity. Neuroplasticity enables this transformation by allowing repeated attentional choices to reshape synaptic connectivity over time, strengthening pathways associated with appreciation while weakening those linked to chronic dissatisfaction through disuse, meaning that gratitude is not merely an emotional preference, but a training process that alters the structural organization of neural networks responsible for perception, valuation, and motivation. Each time you deliberately focus on something that is working rather than something that is lacking, you reinforce associations between effort and reward, stability and possibility, presence and progress. These associations gradually become automatic. You respond to setbacks with curiosity rather than defeatism. You pursue challenges with strategic patience rather than avoidance. And you engage with opportunities more readily because your internal model of the world includes evidence that growth is attainable rather than improbable. Wealth, in this context, is not limited to financial accumulation. It encompasses relational capital, skill development, emotional resilience, and informational access, all of which contribute to the generation of value across multiple domains. Gratitude conditioning enhances awareness of these assets, allowing you to leverage them intentionally rather than overlooking them due to habitual comparison or dissatisfaction. Repetition remains essential. Isolated moments of appreciation may improve mood temporarily, but sustained conditioning requires daily engagement so that new neural patterns become dominant rather than situational. When appreciation becomes habitual, identity begins to shift. You see yourself as resourced rather than deprived, capable rather than constrained, positioned for growth rather than excluded from it. Identity influences behavior. Behavior shapes outcomes. Outcomes reinforce identity. And this feedback loop supports expanding opportunity over time by aligning perception with possibility rather than limitation. Through consistent gratitude conditioning, Your brain learns to recognize value where it previously anticipated scarcity, transforming appreciation into a foundational mechanism for adaptive perception, strategic engagement, and sustainable progress in environments that reward resilience, creativity, and collaborative initiative. Gratitude has a direct influence on how your brain regulates dopamine, and understanding this relationship is essential if you want to build sustainable motivation rather than short bursts of excitement followed by emotional crashes, because dopamine is not simply responsible for pleasure as it is often described, but instead functions as a neurotransmitter associated with reward prediction, anticipation of progress, and the reinforcement of behaviors that appear to move you closer toward outcomes your brain has categorized as valuable, meaning that how you interpret your environment and your own progress determines whether dopamine is released in a way that supports persistence or in a way that encourages impulsivity and dissatisfaction. When individuals are conditioned by scarcity-based thinking, dopamine becomes closely tied to external achievements such as financial gains, recognition, social validation, or milestone completion, creating a motivational structure in which effort only feels worthwhile if it produces immediate or dramatic results. And once those results are obtained, the nervous system quickly adapts through a process known as hedonic normalization, returning baseline satisfaction to its previous level and compelling the individual to pursue even greater rewards in order to recreate the temporary surge of motivation that accompanied the initial success. This cycle can gradually become addictive. Motivation becomes dependent on outcome. Outcome becomes unpredictable, and unpredictability introduces anxiety. Anxiety reduces cognitive flexibility. Reduced flexibility encourages short-term decision-making driven by urgency rather than strategic planning. Over time, this pattern leads to burnout, frustration, and emotional volatility because the nervous system is constantly oscillating between anticipation and disappointment, with very little reinforcement available during the slow and often invisible stages of progress that characterize meaningful growth in areas such as career development, financial stability, or personal mastery. Gratitude interrupts this pattern by expanding the range of experiences that your brain associates with reward, allowing dopaminergic reinforcement to occur not only when major milestones are achieved, but also when incremental progress is recognized, supportive feedback is received, or effort is invested consistently over time, meaning that motivation becomes linked to process rather than exclusively to outcome. When you intentionally acknowledge small wins, lessons learned, or existing advantages that make continued effort possible, your brain begins to release dopamine in response to engagement itself, reinforcing behaviors that contribute to long-term success even when external validation is delayed or uncertain. This broadening of reward triggers stabilizes motivation. You are no longer dependent on dramatic achievements to feel encouraged. Daily progress generates reinforcement. Effort becomes intrinsically satisfying, and persistence becomes easier to sustain because your nervous system receives regular confirmation that forward movement is valuable regardless of immediate results. Consistency in dopamine release reduces impulsive decision-making because your brain does not need to seek rapid gratification in order to maintain engagement, allowing executive functions associated with the prefrontal cortex to guide behavior more effectively toward long-term objectives. Gratitude also modulates stress responses that interfere with dopamine regulation. When individuals perceive themselves as lacking or disadvantaged, cortisol levels increase in response to perceived threat, narrowing attentional focus and reducing sensitivity to delayed rewards. This makes immediate gratification appear more appealing than strategic investment. By contrast, Appreciation reduces perceived threat by emphasizing stability and support within the environment, lowering cortisol activity and enabling your brain to value incremental gains that contribute to sustainable growth. Scarcity conditioning narrows perception. It frames success as rare and competition as inevitable. It encourages defensive strategies that prioritize protection over expansion. Abundance conditioning, facilitated through gratitude, promotes generative thinking by assuming that value can be created through collaboration, innovation, and consistent effort rather than merely captured through competition. This assumption influences negotiation style, communication patterns, and willingness to explore new opportunities. Individuals operating from abundance are more likely to invest in relationships, share information, and pursue mutually beneficial arrangements, all of which enhance long-term returns even if short-term advantages appear smaller. Through consistent gratitude practice, dopamine becomes associated with engagement, resilience, and adaptive behavior rather than exclusively with external reward, supporting a motivational framework that is stable, sustainable, and aligned with strategic growth rather than compulsive striving for validation or achievement. The neurochemistry of appreciation extends far beyond a simple mood boost, because when gratitude becomes a repeated cognitive and emotional pattern, it begins to influence multiple interacting systems in the brain and body, shaping how you process stress, how you interpret social interactions, how resilient you remain during uncertainty, and how effectively you sustain long-term ambition without collapsing into exhaustion or comparison-driven dissatisfaction, meaning that appreciation is not merely a pleasant emotional state, but a regulatory mechanism capable of altering the physiological environment in which decisions, relationships, and opportunities are navigated. At the neurological level, genuine gratitude activates regions within the prefrontal cortex associated with perspective-taking, emotional regulation, and value assessment, allowing you to reinterpret events in ways that reduce catastrophic thinking and expand perceived possibility, which in turn lowers excessive activation of the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, decreasing baseline anxiety and reducing the frequency of fight-or-flight responses triggered by ambiguous or competitive situations. When amygdala reactivity is moderated, cortisol secretion becomes more balanced, preventing chronic stress from impairing executive function, memory consolidation, and impulse control, all of which are necessary for strategic financial planning, career advancement, and relational stability. In other words, appreciation creates neurochemical conditions that allow your highest-order cognitive systems to operate efficiently rather than being overridden by survival-driven reactivity. Gratitude also influences serotonin pathways, contributing to a stable sense of well-being that is not entirely dependent on fluctuating external achievements, meaning that instead of relying exclusively on dramatic success to elevate mood, your emotional baseline becomes less volatile and more resilient, which protects against the depressive rumination that often emerges when individuals compare themselves unfavorably to peers or interpret temporary setbacks as permanent failure. When serotonin levels stabilize, mood becomes less reactive to minor disappointments, allowing persistence through slow or incremental progress that would otherwise feel discouraging, and persistence is one of the most reliable predictors of long-term wealth creation, skill mastery, and meaningful relationship development. Oxytocin activity is also enhanced when appreciation is expressed interpersonally, strengthening trust and bonding between individuals, which increases social cohesion and reinforces networks of mutual support that are essential for collaborative success in professional and personal domains. No significant accomplishment emerges in isolation. Access to opportunity often depends on trust-based relationships, shared information, and reciprocal investment. When gratitude strengthens relational bonds, it increases social capital, and social capital frequently determines access to resources, mentorship, partnerships, and opportunities that accelerate growth. Thus, appreciation becomes a multiplier not because it magically generates wealth, but because it strengthens the social and psychological infrastructure through which wealth and opportunity flow. Furthermore, gratitude supports emotional resilience by broadening attentional scope, a phenomenon described in positive psychology research as the broaden and build effect, in which positive emotional states expand awareness and encourage exploratory behavior, creative thinking, and flexible problem solving. When your mind is broadened, you see alternative solutions rather than fixed obstacles. You interpret feedback as informative rather than threatening, and you experiment with strategies rather than retreating into defensive avoidance. This flexibility increases adaptability in rapidly changing economic and social environments, enhancing long-term success probability. Over time, repeated activation of these neurochemical pathways consolidates new emotional habits. Your baseline expectation shifts from anticipating scarcity to anticipating possibility. You begin to assume that value can be generated rather than merely competed for. This assumption influences micro-decisions in everyday contexts, from how you negotiate compensation to how you respond to setbacks in entrepreneurial ventures or creative projects. Because you perceive yourself as supported rather than deprived, you are more likely to take calculated risks, to recover quickly from failure, and to maintain composure when outcomes do not immediately align with expectations. Appreciation therefore acts as a success multiplier by optimizing emotional regulation, strengthening relational networks, stabilizing motivational chemistry, and preserving cognitive flexibility across varying conditions. Its power lies not in wishful thinking, but in its capacity to systematically adjust neurochemical patterns that determine how you perceive challenges, how you engage with opportunity, and how persistently you act in pursuit of long-term objectives, ensuring that your internal environment supports sustained growth rather than undermines it through chronic stress, impulsivity, or self-sabotage rooted in scarcity-driven narratives. Transforming gratitude from an occasional emotional reaction into a dependable mechanism for cognitive and behavioral alignment requires a structured daily conditioning system. Because without repetition and intentional reinforcement, even the most powerful insights remain temporary states rather than enduring traits, meaning that the brain must be trained consistently to recognize value, progress, and support within its environment so that appreciation becomes an automatic interpretive lens, rather than a conscious effort that is easily abandoned during stress, competition, or perceived failure. This conditioning process begins with intentional attentional priming at the start of each day, during which you deliberately identify specific aspects of your life that represent stability, opportunity, or incremental advancement, such as access to knowledge, supportive relationships, financial resources, physical health, or the lessons gained from previous challenges, thereby signaling to your reticular activating system that these elements are relevant and worthy of notice as you navigate subsequent experiences. When the brain receives this signal repeatedly, it adjusts perceptual filters so that information consistent with appreciation is detected more readily throughout the day, increasing the likelihood that you will notice constructive feedback, emerging opportunities, or collaborative possibilities that might otherwise have been overlooked due to habitual focus on limitation or comparison. During daily activities, micro-level acknowledgments reinforce this priming by associating effort with reward, meaning that when a task is completed, a problem is solved, or assistance is received, you pause briefly to register appreciation for the event, allowing dopaminergic reinforcement to strengthen neural pathways that link engagement with satisfaction rather than linking satisfaction exclusively to dramatic outcomes. This association broadens the motivational landscape. Small improvements become meaningful. Consistent effort becomes intrinsically rewarding. And persistence becomes easier to sustain because your nervous system receives regular confirmation that forward movement contributes to value even when immediate results are not externally visible. Evening reflection consolidates these associations through memory encoding. By reviewing moments of progress, connection, or resilience at the end of the day, you activate hippocampal processes that integrate emotional and cognitive information into long-term storage, strengthening neural pathways associated with positive appraisal while simultaneously reducing the salience of unproductive rumination. Over weeks and months, this repetition recalibrates baseline perception so that scarcity-driven interpretations no longer dominate automatically. Abundance-based interpretations become accessible alternatives rather than distant ideals. Decision-making shifts accordingly. You pursue opportunities with greater confidence. You evaluate setbacks as informational rather than catastrophic. And you maintain engagement with long-term objectives even when short-term feedback is ambiguous or delayed. Identity gradually evolves through this process. You begin to perceive yourself not as someone attempting to escape limitation, but as someone already positioned within a network of resources that can be expanded through consistent action, which influences posture, tone, communication style, and willingness to initiate collaborative or entrepreneurial efforts. Others perceive this stability. Confidence grounded in appreciation appears less threatening than arrogance rooted in comparison. Collaboration becomes more likely. Trust increases, and opportunities for partnership, mentorship, or advancement emerge more frequently because your behavior signals reliability rather than desperation. Through daily conditioning, gratitude becomes integrated into predictive models that guide expectation and behavior, ensuring that perception supports strategic growth rather than constraining it through habitual focus on deficit. Over time, appreciation functions as both foundation and accelerant of sustainable success by aligning neural circuitry, emotional regulation, and behavioral initiative with assumptions of possibility rather than inevitability of loss, thereby increasing the probability that consistent effort will translate into meaningful achievement across financial, relational, and creative domains. Because when your brain is trained to recognize existing value, it becomes more capable of generating additional value through adaptive engagement with opportunity, turning gratitude into a disciplined practice that reshapes perception, motivation, and identity in ways that systematically enhance long-term progress and fulfillment. In the journey toward mastering the art of creating and shaping your reality, one reaches a point where understanding the mechanics of manifestation is no longer sufficient, and the need arises to synthesize all prior knowledge into a cohesive, actionable system that not only aligns with your conscious intentions, but also harmonizes with the deep-seated patterns of your subconscious mind, which have, over the course of a lifetime, determined much of your habitual thought, emotional response, and behavioral output. So the first step in this advanced integration process involves learning to consciously observe and refine the manifestation algorithm, a multifaceted approach that requires a delicate balance of clarity, focus, emotional resonance, and unwavering alignment with your desired outcomes. Because the mind operates most efficiently when it is not fragmented by contradictory beliefs or unresolved emotional patterns, and so every individual seeking mastery must begin by mapping their current mental and emotional landscape, identifying the areas of resistance, doubt, or lingering limitation, and then systematically replacing these with patterns, affirmations, and visualizations that embody the reality they wish to bring forth. Understanding that manifestation is not a linear process, but a dynamic interplay between thought, emotion, intention, and inspired action, which, when harnessed together with precision, forms the core of the manifestation algorithm that can be applied consciously and repeatedly to generate consistent results in every aspect of life. The manifestation algorithm itself can be broken down into several critical steps that, while individually simple, combine to create a powerful chain reaction of reality creation, beginning with clarity, which involves not only defining what you want, but feeling it so vividly in your body and mind that it becomes indistinguishable from what is already present, followed by the practice of emotional alignment, where you cultivate a state of inner congruence in which your thoughts, feelings, and physical sensations all communicate the same unambiguous message to the universe, because energy follows attention, and the universe responds to the vibrational frequency you consistently emit. So any dissonance, uncertainty, or negative self-talk dilutes the power of your manifestation, and therefore, mastering the art of holding unwavering alignment even in the face of apparent external contradiction is a skill that must be practiced daily with discipline, patience, and a profound understanding of your own inner energetic ecosystem. Next comes the principle of inspired action, which is often misunderstood as mere effort, when in reality it is the deliberate and intuitive steps you take that feel natural, effortless, and in harmony with your higher intention, guided not by forced willpower, but by a deep attunement to opportunities and synchronicities that appear when your vibration is aligned. And this step is critical because without action, no matter how clear or aligned your intentions are, the physical reality cannot manifest, as the universe requires the physical enactment of your aligned thoughts and emotions to complete the cycle of creation. So integrating inspired action into the manifestation algorithm ensures that every decision, interaction, and choice is consciously contributing to the reality you wish to experience. The final element of the algorithm is persistent refinement, which means constantly observing the outcomes of your intentions, noting where resistance, doubt, or unconscious patterns are affecting the flow, and making subtle yet deliberate adjustments to thoughts, emotions, and actions until the desired reality emerges consistently and predictably. And this step reinforces the idea that manifestation is both an art and a science, requiring creativity, intuition, and analytical awareness. Because the mind is a feedback system that responds to both conscious input and subconscious programming, and without ongoing refinement, even the most powerful intentions may be diluted by unresolved beliefs or old conditioning, making this iterative process not just optional, but essential for anyone serious about mastering their reality at the highest level. Once this algorithm is understood and practiced consistently, the next level of advanced integration involves combining all 7 fundamental laws that govern the process of creation, which include clarity, alignment, emotional resonance, inspired action, persistence, subconscious programming, and vibrational consistency. And while each law has been explored individually, the true power emerges when they are not viewed in isolation, but as an interconnected system in which each law amplifies and reinforces the others. Because when your clarity informs your emotional alignment, your inspired action strengthens your persistence, and your vibrational consistency rewires your subconscious. The result is a seamless, energetic flow that manifests your desired reality with both speed and precision, eliminating the friction and delay that often plague those who attempt to manifest without full integration. Combining all 7 laws requires a level of self-mastery that is not achieved overnight, and it demands that you cultivate daily practices designed to maintain balance, focus, and energetic coherence, including visualization exercises, journaling, gratitude practices, meditation, and reflective observation, because these practices do more than reinforce intention. They recalibrate your entire nervous system to operate in harmony with your highest vision, allowing you to move through life with an effortless magnetism that attracts circumstances, people, and opportunities aligned with your desired outcomes. And as this integration deepens, you begin to notice that reality itself bends and flexes around your intentions, not as a forced imposition, but as a natural reflection of the internal harmony you have cultivated. A harmony in which your conscious desires and subconscious patterns are no longer at odds, but operate as a unified engine for creation. Finally, as you master the manifestation algorithm and the integration of the 7 laws, the stage is set for designing your 90-day reality shift, a structured yet flexible framework that allows you to take the theoretical mastery of manifestation and apply it in a tangible, measurable way to produce profound changes in your life within a defined time frame. And this process is particularly powerful because it combines accountability, clarity, and consistent energetic alignment to create a concentrated period of growth and transformation, during which old limitations are released, new patterns are installed, and the entire energetic blueprint of your life is recalibrated to operate in harmony with your highest vision, ensuring that your manifestations are not only achievable, but sustainable and deeply aligned with your long-term identity and purpose. Designing your 90-day reality shift begins with a detailed assessment of your current life situation, where you evaluate every area of your existence, from personal relationships to financial abundance, physical health, emotional well-being, and spiritual fulfillment, identifying areas where your energy may be blocked or misaligned. Because clarity about your starting point is essential to creating a precise roadmap for transformation. And once you have established this baseline, the next step is to define your specific goals for the 90-day period, not in vague terms, but in rich, sensory detail that allows your mind and emotions to experience the outcome as if it is already present. Because the universe responds to the frequency of what is felt and imagined with full conviction. So the more vivid and emotionally charged your vision, the more magnetic and potent your manifestation will become. And this process is enhanced by incorporating daily practices that reinforce alignment, such as visualization, affirmations, emotional calibration, journaling, and intentional exposure to experiences and people that resonate with your desired reality, ensuring that every moment within the 90 days is consciously leveraged to deepen your manifestation power. Within this period, it is crucial to implement strategies for maintaining vibrational consistency, which involves a daily commitment to monitoring your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, recognizing any deviation from alignment, and making immediate corrections to preserve the integrity of your energy field, because even minor fluctuations in vibration can create delays or distortions in the manifestation process. And the most successful reality shifts occur when consistency is prioritized over intensity, ensuring that every day, every decision, and every interaction is infused with a level of awareness and intentionality that collectively accelerates the manifestation timeline, making the 90-day framework not just a plan but a living, adaptive system that responds to your energy and progress dynamically, rather than a rigid schedule that relies solely on external action. Parallel to this, the wealth and attraction blueprint must be integrated, which involves understanding and applying the principles of abundance consciousness to every decision and interaction, recognizing that wealth is not merely the accumulation of money, but the alignment of your energetic frequency with opportunities, value exchange, and personal power, and by consciously adopting the mindset, behaviors, and habits of those who naturally attract abundance, you create a magnetic field that draws prosperity in all forms, while simultaneously refining your capacity to receive it without resistance. Because the energy of lack or scarcity is incompatible with true manifestation, and the ability to remain receptive, grateful, and empowered is as important as the actions you take, forming a holistic blueprint for attracting both material and experiential wealth into your life. The integration of these systems during the 90-day shift also demands a focus on subconscious reprogramming, which involves identifying and replacing limiting beliefs, emotional blocks, and unconscious patterns that may have been accumulated over years or even decades, with empowering, constructive alternatives that support your desired reality. Because the subconscious mind acts as the primary engine of manifestation, determining the speed, clarity, and fidelity of your results, and by employing techniques such as visualization, emotional anchoring, affirmations, and guided meditations, you can effectively overwrite outdated programming, allowing your conscious intentions to be fully realized. And when combined with consistent alignment, inspired action, and vibrational management, this process creates a compounding effect that accelerates the materialization of your goals. Finally, long-term identity expansion is the final layer of this advanced integration, because lasting transformation is not merely the achievement of specific goals, but the evolution of your identity to align with your highest potential. And this requires a commitment to self-observation, deliberate experimentation, and incremental growth, whereby you expand your comfort zones, adopt new behaviors and mindsets, and gradually embody the qualities and characteristics of the person capable of sustaining the reality you have manifested, because reality always conforms to identity, and without aligning your sense of self with your desired outcomes, any manifestation is at risk of being temporary, limited, or inconsistent, making identity work the cornerstone of long-term success and the ultimate expression of advanced integration in the art of conscious creation. Long-term identity expansion requires a deliberate and sustained focus on internal transformation, because the deepest level of manifestation is not simply about achieving external results, but about evolving into a version of yourself whose natural state is already in alignment with the reality you desire. And this process begins with the recognition that every thought, feeling, habit, and behavior you currently exhibit is a reflection of your existing identity. And unless you consciously expand that identity, any external manifestations risk being temporary or limited, since reality always mirrors the version of you that exists at the subconscious level. So the challenge is to step into a higher frequency identity through consistent practice, immersive visualization, emotional calibration, and behavioral experimentation, where you intentionally adopt the qualities, mindset, and daily habits of the person you aspire to become, allowing your inner state to magnetically draw the external conditions, circumstances, and opportunities that correspond to this expanded identity, which is why every successful manifestation strategy ultimately loops back to identity, as the core of creation is not the acquisition of objects or experiences, but the embodiment of the self that naturally inhabits and sustains that reality, and through repeated, intentional practice over time, the neural pathways, emotional responses, and habitual patterns of your higher self become fully integrated into your daily functioning. creating a seamless alignment between who you are internally and what manifests externally. This integration process is further enhanced by maintaining a feedback loop that connects your daily experiences with the evolution of your identity. Because without reflection, awareness, and adjustment, even the most advanced manifestation techniques can lose potency. And so a daily practice of self-inquiry, journaling, emotional monitoring, and conscious reflection becomes critical, enabling you to observe where you may have reverted to outdated patterns, limiting beliefs, or energetic dissonance, and to take immediate corrective action. Since the universe responds to the quality of your ongoing vibration rather than a one-time effort, and consistent observation ensures that your identity evolution remains fluid, dynamic, and responsive to the realities you wish to create, allowing the 90-day reality shift to serve as both a catalyst and a laboratory for experimenting with higher frequency states of being, where the alignment of thought, emotion, action, and identity can be tested, refined, and mastered, providing a foundation for long-term mastery and the embodiment of a life consciously designed at the deepest level. An additional layer of sophistication in advanced integration involves harmonizing the manifestation algorithm with environmental, social, and energetic contexts, because your reality does not exist in isolation, and the collective energies of the people, places, and systems around you can either amplify or dampen your ability to manifest, making it essential to cultivate environments that support your intentions, seek relationships and networks that resonate with your vision, and consciously manage your exposure to influences that may introduce resistance or distraction, while simultaneously recognizing that your internal state ultimately dictates the external response. And by combining rigorous internal alignment with strategic external calibration, you create an ecosystem in which manifestation occurs more fluidly, opportunities present themselves organically, and the natural unfolding of your desired reality is accelerated as the energy you emit harmonizes with the larger field, drawing conditions, resources, and people who reflect your newly expanded identity, which is why mastery at this stage is as much about energetic stewardship as it is about practical action, and it requires vigilance, discipline, and a deep understanding of cause and effect at both the personal and universal levels. To further solidify this mastery, it is critical to integrate all 7 laws simultaneously in a cyclical, iterative manner, because no single law operates in isolation, and the power of manifestation is exponentially enhanced when clarity, emotional resonance, alignment, inspired action, persistence, subconscious programming, and vibrational consistency are not only acknowledged but actively synchronized, creating a harmonic convergence in which each component reinforces and amplifies the others. And by practicing this integration daily, consciously calibrating each law in relation to the others, and observing the effects in your reality, you achieve a level of precision and responsiveness that allows you to intentionally sculpt circumstances, attract desired experiences, and reshape your life with unprecedented control, turning manifestation from a hopeful exercise into a repeatable, reliable system. And as this system becomes second nature, your 90-day shifts evolve into continuous, long-term cycles of growth, abundance, and identity expansion that perpetuate themselves through the alignment of thought, feeling, and action at every level of being. The final dimension of advanced integration is cultivating a mindset of perpetual expansion, because the mastery of manifestation is not a destination, but an ongoing journey in which each achieved reality becomes the foundation for higher-level desires, deeper understanding, and more sophisticated creation. And this mindset requires the conscious acknowledgement that you are not limited by past experiences, current circumstances, or societal conditioning, but rather empowered by the awareness that every thought, intention, and action contributes to an evolving energetic signature that can attract infinite possibilities. So the practice of advanced integration involves continually refining your inner state, expanding your consciousness, and recalibrating your identity to align with increasingly elevated goals, while simultaneously maintaining gratitude and reverence for the realities you have already manifested, because appreciation is a high-frequency state that both stabilizes and accelerates manifestation, creating a positive feedback loop where recognition of present achievements fuels future creation, reinforcing the alignment between your internal state and external reality. Long-term mastery also requires the ability to consciously cycle between focused manifestation efforts, like the 90-day reality shift, and periods of receptivity, reflection, and adaptation. Because the universe operates through rhythms and cycles, and forcing acceleration or resisting natural flow introduces friction that can delay outcomes. So integrating periods of active creation with mindful observation, emotional recalibration, and subtle energetic adjustments ensures that your vibrational frequency remains aligned, your subconscious remains programmed for success, and your identity continues to expand in harmony with your intentions, creating a sustainable pattern of manifestation in which your desires are not merely achieved, but naturally integrated into the structure of your life, allowing you to operate with both intentionality and ease, as if creation itself is flowing through you rather than being a product of effortful striving. The wealth and attraction blueprint becomes a cornerstone in this ongoing expansion, because by continuously refining your approach to abundance, both material and experiential, you reinforce your energetic alignment with prosperity, opportunity, and value creation, learning to distinguish between fleeting desires and those that resonate with your highest self, and consciously attracting resources, relationships, and experiences that serve your long-term identity and purpose, while releasing attachment to outcomes that are misaligned or transient, which further deepens the energetic coherence required for advanced manifestation, allowing wealth, opportunity, and influence to accumulate organically and sustainably, without the friction of resistance, fear, or unconscious scarcity patterns, turning manifestation into an effortless, natural expression of who you are at the highest level. Ultimately, advanced integration culminates in a profound embodiment of the principles of creation, where the manifestation algorithm, the 7 laws, the 90-day reality shift, the wealth and attraction blueprint, and long-term identity expansion are not merely tools or practices, but an intrinsic part of your being, operating seamlessly and unconsciously as you move through life, with every thought, emotion, and action contributing to a continuously evolving reality that reflects your inner alignment, creative power, and highest vision. And through this embodiment, you achieve not just temporary success, but the ability to intentionally and consistently design your life in alignment with your purpose, your desires, and your fullest potential, creating a dynamic, vibrant reality in which you are both the architect and the living expression of infinite possibility. In this state of mastery, life itself becomes a mirror of your inner evolution, and each manifestation, each experience, each relationship, and each circumstance becomes both a reflection of your expanded identity and a catalyst for further growth, allowing you to consciously co-create your reality with clarity, confidence, and joy, knowing that the principles you have integrated are not external rules, but internal laws of being, guiding you to live in harmony with the universe and with the highest version of yourself. ultimately transforming the act of manifestation from an aspirational goal into the natural, effortless, and ongoing expression of who you truly are, fully aligned, vibrantly alive, and infinitely capable of creating the life you envision. If you found this audiobook insightful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to CliffNote Chronicles so you never miss updates on our upcoming audiobook series covering the law of attraction, manifestation, visualization, and gratitude, your ultimate guide to mastering the art of conscious creation and transforming your life one thought at a time.